Hey, Andreas.
Oh,
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Baseline Show. We are joined here today with Ryan Fleischman of Provide Technologies, who'll be showing us what BRI-1 is all up to. I'll go ahead
Sure,
and hand it off to you.
sure. So my name is Ryan. If you don't know me, I'm the SAP architect and developer evangelist at Provide. Um, and a little bit about my background. Um, Longtime professional in the enterprise IT space, largely on SAP implementations and API integrations. So that's supply chain systems, finance systems, and really excited to be here with the Baseline community. As I got into this realm, um, when I was first looking at blockchain, uh, things like Baseline protocol made a lot of sense in terms of driving value to business users and making the on-chain world feasible. But more than that, communicating a narrative of like what kind of problems can you actually solve. So I'm here today to talk about BRI-1, but also to break down the offerings of like what BRI-1 is as an open source project, as well as what are the provide commercial components that are built from that, and and help give all of you better tools and understanding about what provides, about what BR1 is, and how to use it, how to get involved, and what are some things going on. So I'm going to get my slide deck up here for all of this.
nice, boy. And before you actually continue, I just want to say you mentioned that title evangelist. I don't really love the evangelist title. I guess this is
Yeah,
an
it's
aside,
so
but
yeah, like you're right. So like formally it's evangelist, and like I think the better one, the more modern term for this kind of job role is developer advocate, right? Kind of go, but I go between those two things. I do think it still kind of is evangelism because
it
I
definitely is. I just don't like
yeah
it's just a
yeah
personal thing of mine. If I see an evangelist role, I'm just like, I can't.
Yeah,
Something about living in the
it's
South. Oh, what?
it's what belief system, where do I have to wear a tie on the beach, right? Not quite like that exactly, but yeah, I mean,
Close.
being in this kind of role, it does put you in the position of like really getting your beliefs across as well as ideas, right?
Yeah,
So,
getting people to
all
join
right,
the cult. You gotta
yeah,
get them to believe, really.
yeah. All right, so let's share my screen here and just go to slidesheet here. Okay, so let's talk about BRI-1 and get a refresher because some folks on the call may be familiar with this in the past. Others are still new with it, and some are like never really got a clear idea to begin with, right? So this is a bit of a refresher, and we'll feature a couple other things as well that are going on with that are built off of BRI-1 entirely, and that includes some hands-on demos in SAP and Node that you can leverage later. So yeah, we talked about a couple of these areas here. So what is it? What are the use cases, particularly with Baseline Protocol and Axiom, and Axiom is our name for our reference implementation of of Baseline. We'll break down into why that's you know that subcomponent within PRVD entirely, and walk through a couple other provide updates. So let's start with the core of what we consider BRI-1, PRVD, and it's really these 5 API microservices, right? Ident, Vault, Chain, Axiom, and Privacy. So these 5 API microservices, we host them publicly. They're all subdomains. Ident that provide that services, Vault that provide that services, Chain that provide that services, Axiom that provide that services, Privacy that provide that services. That's our own hosted instance. Other enterprise users can host and run the stack on their own. These are entirely open source, right? And a bit more of, what function do each of these pull together? Think of them as 5 pieces of a puzzle, right? Ident being the identity management for like the self-sovereign identity for DIDs, for onboarding, DID resolver, built into that. Vault, this is creation and signing and verifying of with private keys as a service. Endchain specifically for blockchains, right? How do I connect to different EVM compatible blockchains? And so really, I like telling people this: Ident, Vault, and Endchain by themselves make up a kind of wallet as a service offering, right? Similar to what you may have seen with other wallet as a service offerings from like Magic or Coinbase, or I think there's other wallet as a service providers there. But these next two parts are very ZK specific, right? Axiom, right? This is what inherits all the properties of what we put into the baseline protocol specification, right? In terms of protocol messaging, subject accounts, work groups, right? It all goes through Axiom. And at a lower level to that, Axiom internally uses privacy, which is another like general ZK as a service component, right? So these are API microservices. They run off chain, right? So for an enterprise to use, but they do communicate on chain, which include things like provide network, but they also go to other blockchains as well.
Yeah, and if I could, is it okay if I just jump in, throw questions, whatever? Or...
Sure. Yeah, you can jump into the question. That's good.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that, yeah, the ident, vault, and chain could be used as just like a wallet of service on its own, but I'm just wondering, as a developer, how easy or feasible is it if I just wanted to use, ident and use that as part of my, like self-sovereign identity and DID needs inside of my project? Like, is that totally doable? How hard would it be to
Yeah.
integrate that? Are there kind of missing pieces because it should work in tandem with Vault and Chain, or?
Yeah. So and for some of these, you can pick and choose things out for your given use case, right? So for example, Vault, Vault, you can pass data in for data to be signed by a wallet and receive it back, right? So that by itself is hugely useful in a lot of different Web3 integrations, because there's a lot of places where you're thinking, man, I want this integration, but I don't want to keep the private key inside this application, right? And I just want to get the signature, right? Those signatures are compatible since they're BIP39 wallets. Those are compatible, regardless of whether you use Endchain or not, right? So that's another example of like how these are components, really. Now, what I would say, right, is that ident is the access and like identity management and authority layer to all these other 4, right? So you're often, you're using self-sovereign identity to authenticate to these other 4 services. And in fact, necessarily to Axiom, right? It's required, right? You need to have, setup of a DID, setup of a work group, subject account, etc. But ident, yes, you could use that entirely by itself, just for DIDs and self-sovereign identity. And if these other 4 things didn't apply to you, you could do that, right? That's kind of why they're breaking up that way. So great question overall. And I put the GitHub links all out here because sometimes, in baseline land, we can get confused of where things are, right? It's been complex trying to get all of BRI-1 updated back into baseline repo at a given time, simply because there's a lot of work in each one of these repos, but altogether they make up different functionalities that are tacked on into our baseline protocol implementation. So that's the open source APIs. And this is where I want to make a clear distinguishment of like, those are the open source APIs open to everyone, right? That you can fork and use, but there are provide commercial products right, that are built upon these microservices for different purposes. One is Shuttle. Shuttle is a low-code designer that's meant to make setup of different scenarios with either baseline protocol with the Axiom component or just other general integrations into enterprise systems to make that easy, right? So feasibly, you could use all of those API microservices without Shuttle if you so desire, if your use cases demanded that. And there are docs you could go through, and that the better you understand this framework, you really could almost self-service a lot of your own needs. But that's Shuttle, and we will do some hands-on stuff with Shuttle here shortly. And the other two products I want to highlight here. One is the Carbon Mark API, also known as ECO, Enterprise Carbon Offsets. And that's an API platform that incorporates provide payments with the carbon retirement capabilities of the Carbon Mark digital marketplace, right? Built for enterprises that want to be able to retire carbon offsets on demand without any barriers in any amount or dollars or tonnage they want. So I don't know how much time we have to get into that. I will say there is an upcoming session, August 1st, that is going to walk through all of the SAP integrations to this in greater detail. But I think we'll get a quick demo on this nonetheless. And provide payments. Provide payments, fills this other needs of enterprise where companies may want to use blockchains or use digital currencies, but they don't want to hold them on a long-term basis, right? So all of the BRI-1 components, easily fit in and integrate to this because it's built off of it, right? And we use that to kind of meter the usage of different parties to say, okay, you had to use this much in gas or this much in stablecoin. Here's your fiat invoice in arrears for what we observed your usage of network usage wise. So I hope this helps clear up some things for folks in terms of, because you get confused sometimes of like BRI-1, PRVD, provide, Shuttle, what are all these things, right? And what are they relative to me, where they live, all that. So that's some clarity on that for folks everywhere. And I'll take some time to talk more in depth about Axiom. So why this name? Axiom refers to this definition of something that is self-evidently true when you speak, right? And that's a characteristic that we commonly can think of with zero knowledge proofs, because we're trying to wrap our heads around like, what is this like big string of characters that I'm looking at? What is this Merkle tree that I'm looking at? What is it? What is it for? Right? It's meant to be this axiomatic, right? Verification of data, right? Regardless of whether it's a business process or a blockchain thing, right? But more on the business side. So, so Axiom as this API microservice, it's an off-chain creation and verification of these ZK proofs. Now, an important consideration, right? As we think about doing this on-chain, right, into smart contracts, possession of the same private keys and other considerations make on-chain verification possible, right? To like through things like the PRVD network or other networks, right? Big topic there in terms of how that works. There's been a lot of really great open source work done in Baseline today on like using verifier.sol, right, to do that verification. I think that's a great topic to dive into, but still hitting on a few highlights here. When I'm describing this to a business user, right, I talk about these four things, right? Precision of data, meaning you get a very exact look at what the state of this data ought to be. It's also privacy preserving. That's another characteristic of zero knowledge we talk a lot about. This third one is composability. And as I get further into shuttle here in a minute, and like look through a protocol messaging example, you'll see why. Because this composability is so important. Because as high potential as this area of zero knowledge is, what often puts off many developers is this learning curve that's involved with zero knowledge, and like really heady terms and that get in there. So composability is an important part of ramping up the developer experience to make integrating ZK very simple. And lastly, of course, is interoperability, right? Which is something we're working together in BPI interop to make sure we're establishing and standardizing based on adoption of the baseline protocol standard. A few notes: why the name split? Well, we had previously named the service baseline, right? But guess what? There's several baseline implementations, right? So what does that look like if, say, a company wanted to run both BRI-1, BRI-3? How do you name them? How do you address them? All that, right? So this was to help kind of just distinguish the naming convention in case there's multiple available. But also, I think based on this kind of definition I gave of Axiom and like these kind of characteristics, right? It's kind of to marketing, branding, and to enterprise audience to make them like get their hands around this topic of zero knowledge, which they haven't always before. All
I
right.
actually quite like the like if we were to compare the two, Axiom baseline, just purely from a branding.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I do lean towards the name Axiom. I do
Yeah.
think it better from
Yeah.
a math perspective. No
Yeah.
no shade there, Andreas, on the baseline name. I'm not sure
Well,
how that was chosen,
it's
but
I mean, it's an older name, and it like I always like to choose the best name possible to things, right? I'm sure. I mean, we've well established the term baselining with a number of people, and but I think it's a good idea for BRI-3. Like think about a similar kind of terminology or name, right? That can make thinking about these services very direct for users. But thank you. I always like saying I like finding good names to these things, because so much of everything is the adoption is just the name, right?
yeah, I think it's a good name. I mean, Axiom and both baseline, I feel like they're choices that kind of, I'm sure, have been overused, right? If you go out there and look online, you're gonna find a bunch
Yeah,
of
that is the challenging thing, because there are other products unrelated to ZK that are called Axiom. Right now, it's this is more important for just just describing the functionality of these services, right? That's really the key thing, right? When you're working with IT change managers or developers, so that they can clearly identify this thing from that thing, right? And yeah, because as we talk about in the BPI interop, sometimes there will be a need for different enterprises to correspond with different parts of different BPIs, right? That are out there. So hey, I have a couple use cases to talk about, and we'll kick things off with the banking use case that we've been working with. And by the way, a cool thing I found last night when I was scrolling through LinkedIn, CTO of SAP, Jürgen Müller, said, "Hey, wouldn't self-sovereign identity be really good at tackling this problem of like determining the vendor bank accounts, what they accurately are?" That's what we're working on in the BPI interop, right? That's the business use case we're working from. So let me cut over to Shuttle here, and that should illuminate some things in terms of
You
how
should
things
let
work.
Mara know. You should let Mara know. It's like if SAP is really interested, they should.
Yeah.
I mean, no, seriously.
Yeah, they really should, right? Because like and you'll get to see this that like this is written, first So first, what happens actually, before anything's written in Node.js or ABAP or any of that, is we have to design the scenario, right? So what does the design of the scenario look like in Shuttle? So we try to create a user experience around creating the Axiom workflows, the baseline workflows in the most straightforward kind of way possible, right? So looking at this workflow, you see I have a box, and you can chain different boxes altogether, recursive ZK snarks altogether, right? But this is just a very simple workflow of just one step, right? And if I select this box, there are a few pieces of information that define the whole Axiom baseline scenario. One is a name of a work step. And you'll see here this circuit selection. So people who are really into ZK know that there's many different kinds of ZK circuits that are available. Here, I just chose a very general consistency, like data precision type of ZK circuit. We won't have to go into all the different kinds of circuits, but also see that this checkbox says requires finality. This refers to this idea of, hey, I really want to get this ZK proof propagated to Ethereum layer 1, right? And there's some considerations in the shuttle product to do that go through provide network, go through layer 2s up to layer 1. That's another topic for another day. But the other important thing, and this is what I think is actually the guts of what makes the composability possible, is this domain model and participants, right? So what does this mean? So a domain model, if I just look around here, let's look at models. And this is familiar to the folks who have been working with this in BPI interop, but this is basically, what does this raw data look like out of the system, right? So in this self-sovereign identity and banking data verification, we're thinking about these elements of data, right? What's in a bank account to a vendor in the ERP system? One is an ID number to the vendor, but it's also their routing number, account number, country that the bank's in, the date in which we're identifying this in an identifier, right? So we want to do something where it's simply data in, related participants, and get my ZK proof out, right? Let's make this very simple for developers to go do, right? And once this workflow is deployed, that's what's actually possible. So if I look inside this console, you can see I've emitted a couple different protocol messages already. So there's a few there. And let's look at how you would actually do that, let's say either with Postman or with Node.js. And by the way, this is actually going to go into the BPI interop folder in a pull request just a bit later, maybe by Friday. But if I look over here, let's open up Postman. And I do have this under Provide Bank Shield. That's our commercial branding of it, but we can separate that out for open source purposes here as well. But let's think about the authentication flow that actually is needed for Axiom, but also just very generally to BRI-1 as a whole. So in this is what you'll see more of from Provide going forward with a lot of sample projects is, how do I generate my credentials, right? So typically what you need to do when you want to first connect it to any of these services in BRI-1, you want to do some access token generation. And this I already did, right? So this is the initial access token that connects me to all of my different organizations, right? That I am onboarding this ecosystem to. Now, what's required is, in terms of authentication, how do I authenticate based on those organizations, right? So what you do is you generate a refresh token. So these are organizations that are separated by different units of companies. Sometimes you just have one, right? Here I have this org ID, and that's my baseline demo organization for today, right? And once you have a refresh token, right? Once you have that created, you can always get these access tokens, right? So if we look under the hood at what one of these refresh or access tokens look like in gwt.io, you can find all of this information about what's there, right? In terms of, what kind of permissions have been granted here, the user ID, all of that. So it's a bit more involved than a typical API key, but it's meant for that very enterprise specificity, right? Looking at a verification message here, right? So once you have that long data refresh token, which can last an extended period of time, anytime you're running this integration, you're going to get a short dated access token to connect to the other services. And let's look at this protocol message, right? So going back to the idea of how do I make ZK composable, how to make it simple, right? And this is as simple as we can get it down to, I really think, right? Is, payload of data. So that, banking data that we had created earlier, right? So that vendor number, the routing number, account number, country date. And this whole payload, based on the kind of workflow or domain model, configurable, right? People who know the baseline spec really well also know about this workgroup ID and subject account ID, right? This is what identifies the participants in specific work groups and workflows, all of that, right? So if I go through and just hit send here, there you can find that I've created another ZK proof that I can go verify, either on or off chain, right? So that's the basics of creating a protocol message with Axiom. And you can see as well, when I go back into Shuttle, there I have another one logged here, right? And since it's a demo account, this won't not necessarily do this, but in production, right? When I had that selection of that requires finality, that triggers our ZK rollup to do that. A few remarks here of why would I do that? Why do I need this ZK proof on chain? There's a couple considerations. One is in real world asset tokenization, right? If we wanted to do factored invoices, real world business that we don't want to leak the details to, that's one use case. Another is of course, and this is the very baseline protocol like kind of perspective, is simply using Ethereum as an anchor of truth, right? So a great example, something we're building on is carbon emissions, right? So many companies are trying to report and verify their carbon emissions across different counterparties to make it non-reputable, right? And that's a great example of something that's not as like token heavy or speculation heavy. It's something that people just want to have shared and be verifiable. So let's kind of change up the formula here a bit. Looking over here in Postman, I have another one.
Before
that-
you move on, can I ask a question about that? What you
Yeah.
got back? Like, so,
Yep.
so you got that proof, you set some fields in total, you got that proof, and, let's say we're passing that to somebody, what do we tell them? Hey, this is the proof that shows what, what am I exactly proving to you?
Yeah. So what others would have to do to verify this proof, right, is essentially the question, right? They would have to produce another proof on their own, right? Using the same data. Now they can use their own instance of the API to verify it, right? If they so desired, right? They could also, if you want to rip inside the guts, inside of what keys are there, and how the data processing inside Axiom works, and like handcraft it yourself, right? In terms of the verification of the proof, that could be done as well, right? Because yeah, ZK proofs are not vendor specific in any kind of way, right? It's just the matter of distribution of keys and data that make that verification possible.
So,
So-
quick question.
Yeah.
So, either you can verify the proof off chain, right? Well, you should have the capability in the client, right? That you're
Yeah.
offering, right? That
Yeah.
you're using, right? It should be, you should have the because that's just the library that you need, right? That's
Yeah,
one.
so
Go ahead.
yes, so you should always be able to verify the proof off chain, right? And
Right.
I think that's always a consideration before even attempting to verify on chain is let's go verify it off chain first, right? So let's have a sender receiver type of scenario, right? I send a proof about my carbon emissions, for example, and I
Right.
correspond with third parties to say, hey, look, here are my emissions. You can verify them here out of this block and this storage location on chain, right? Now, the first thing like a regulator or process partner would do is, after looking at that, in terms of verifying, hey, is this a scope 3 emission of mine? Or are they being precise in their reporting based on the information I have? One of the first things they would do is verify it off chain, right? It's like, is my understanding correct here or not, right? And when they want to acknowledge it, right, to say, yes, that's precise, that's accurate. I verified it off chain. Let me go verify it on chain now as well, right?
So
So
why would you do that? Especially, let's say you don't have any libraries installed on your device, right? You
Mhm.
don't have any cryptographic capabilities, right? You're being you're being handed that. It's like, wait, what? Would it make sense that any proof that's being posted on chain is then automatically that you automatically run the verifier on that proof, on that snark proof?
Yeah, like I think this is one area we still have some room for growth, is like templating out the smart contracts, right? That do these verifications, so that the smart contract could always be self-verifying, right? When it takes in a proof, right? And then the only thing it would need to have is, look at message.sender as like, hey, is this someone who could be a participant in this work group at all?
You
Right?
don't even need that. It's like, because
Yeah.
you're not revealing anything. It's just an open,
Yeah.
open function where you put in not even the proof, you're just putting the ID of that proof. And then
Yeah.
what you get back is whether that proof was verified on chain or not.
Yeah, so this is a particular area where I think Baseline actually has some really exciting room for growth, especially in BPI interop, to do exactly that, right? In Solidity, to make these self-verifying proofs on chain like even easier to set up than they are today. Because I know, yeah, there's been several Solidity examples that have been built out. I think we just need to template that more aggressively, right? To get the standard better adopted, especially in terms of on-chain processing overall. So, and of course, we're always thinking about, in our tech geek world, we're thinking about things like ZK EVMs and layer 3s of how do I make that computationally very affordable, right? In terms of technical overhead, but also economically, right? Because you look at some Solidity contracts that have verifier soul in them, and it's intimidating, right, for someone to set up on their own. So always going in the direction of how do we make this standard more aggressively simple for a typical integration developer at a company to go implement, right? But I think this first step of just being able to generate the proof off chain is a huge step forward. right? Because, companies and enterprises could do this very easily. It's very easy to host an API stack, take in the data, generate the proof, right? And that's entirely gas free, right? And then the parts that matter, the verification on chain have a little bit of cost, but as little cost as possible. So great discussion over that, right? So yeah, the composability of it, of different scenarios. Here's one on carbon emissions, right? Slightly different subject account work group, different payload of data, but same idea, right? In terms of composability to that overall. And yeah, so one thing I want to drive greater awareness to for folks is, yeah, right now I'm showing this in Postman, but there are SDKs that are specific to interacting with the BRI-1 APIs. So if I look here, right, and this is part of the pull request I'm opening for our BPI interrupt stuff. Let's look at this create protocol message code here. And you can see here, I just had a couple imports from ident and Axiom for provide.js, which is our TypeScript library for building applications on our stack. So simply, store some of the requisite variables in env file for demonstration purposes. But if I simply did this, right, and I said, go into terminal here, go node, create protocol message. There you go. So that's that processed in JavaScript there. Again, thinking about how to make this standard approachable. I'm a specialist in ABAP, SAP ABAP, which is a niche programming language that requires you to have an expensive server, and it doesn't reach a lot of people. It reaches some enterprise people, but I did this in JavaScript here for the community's sake, and really because when we're talking about baseline and we're talking about Axiom, we're talking about very heterogeneous types of systems, right? When they're not connected, they could be very different from each other in terms of their landscape, right? That's the whole reason why they're not integrated, right? So think of scenarios of like a large enterprise trying to pay a supplier in Brazil. Different cultures, different technology landscape, different people working, different choices overall, right? How do you bring that all together when they have data that they need to verify, but it's hard to, they can't share and they have to verify, right? That's the ZK component. I do want to share a couple other things that talk about the wallet as a service, and this will give some clues into how do we drive these ZK proofs into a templated verifier.sol, right? And that's the wallet as a service capabilities. So coming back to here, we have a couple other agenda topics here. This is a bit of change gears type of thing, but it does illustrate some of the other APIs here. Let's talk about the Carbon Mark API, right? As one example that integrates to a smart contract through Nchain and provide payments, right? And Vault is used here. So if I go back over to Postman, I can do this, right? So similar authentication setup, like I was describing, in terms of creating an access token. So let's go do that. So let's get this access token. I didn't set this one up entirely just yet. So this actually gives you a good idea of what to do here. So was this set up yet? Or I might have to, there we go. So authorize the access token. List out the organizations. Get a refresh token. Get our access token. Perfect, right? So now we are set up so far with that access token. Let's go interact with Vault actually a little bit. And if I look inside Vault, that's one Vault for the organization. And now we have multiple keys inside of that vault that do different things. And our cryptography experts on the call here will look at and say, oh, there's different kinds of keys that are associated to this user, right? So this one, of course, being important for wallets, this SECP256K1, that's used for signing transactions, right? Very generally. But we also have these other ones for like RSA encryption or baby jub, that's involved with ZK. And of course, simple encryption, decryption, right? Good handy keys to have around for any user for just tackling integrations or just anywhere, right? So we know if you know smart contract integration, right? You always have to sign inputs, right, to get them to broadcast. So let's take a look at one of these like kind of transactions, right? If I go here, this is our integration into the Carbon marketplace. And actually, I might have to change my workspace to get these all filled out. Exactly right. Because I just didn't have time to fill in all the collection variables. But let's actually do that here quickly. I'm going to switch over to my workspace just because I have it a little bit better maintained. Better maintained over here, right? So let's actually do this one real quick. And this one has all of my other variables filled up. Perfect, right? And if we click send here, right, this comes back with some parameters in terms of what's going to go into the smart contract, signing the transaction, right? This is really cool because, typically when you're doing like things with wallets, you need to have the private key, like that 12 to 24 private key local to you in order to sign the transaction. Vault makes that optional. Like Vault abstracts that away, right? So we are putting in some of that hash data, but we're going to get back signed data out of this, right? So there's our signature. And then when we broadcast this, I click send. Now we have a carbon retirement certificate that's generated here. Now these certificates can sometimes take a minute or two to fully load up. And sometimes the Carbon Mark website has a few bugs on it. But let's try to load this one up. Actually, a minute. I'm feeling lucky today. Should be should come up pretty quickly here. Hey, so check that out, right? And this is like the power of this whole stack, right? It does all these amazing things where you can do these fiat crypto rails to different Web3 services for enterprise like this. And you don't have to hold crypto to do it. You're still using wallets, all that. That's the wallet as a service capability there. And let's weave this through, right? Different smart contract integrations for finance or things like this in sustainability, can really move along much better with Axiom, with ZK, with baseline in place, right? To coordinate some other outcomes that are needed, right? A good example is, relative to our business, what's something we are looking to achieve is every time we invoice one of these customers that are using our service, it's to ZK proof the invoice, right? So we have this non-repudiation layer of what we're invoicing you for, right? Because how else could I verifiably determine like this wallet address is Acme Corp, right? Unless they directly revealed that, right? What if I wanted to preserve that privacy for them, right? That's important. So that's one network or one Axiom use case in terms of just like achieving private and precise state of these invoices, right? That we use like the bill in arrears for this type of stuff. So that's, but of course, the fiat crypto bridge, that's one way to do it. You can do full self-custody of things like gas and stable coins as well. and looking at that, that's where these projects like here, like ABAP NFT and the B2B stablecoin project could be really great for people to explore. So there we go. And this is something I want to debut today to some of you folks is B2B stablecoin transfers made possible on SAP, right? So why do that in SAP land, right? Well, most enterprises, most Fortune 500s today use SAP to manage their core finance, the supply chain, order management, all of that, right? And what we have is like a minimum viable product in terms of what does an ERC20 transfer look like out of SAP? How do you program that in? And we have open source this as well for different enterprises to check out. So a few inputs here, even though this is a bit technical, right? And we're going to make this less technical, more approachable, like through the Fiora user experience, etc. But here is my network ID. So the N-chain component has different network IDs for both EVM and non-EVM networks. This one happens to be for Polygon Mumbai, right? And then what kind of stablecoin smart contract? This happens to be my ERC20 for the Cheesecake USD, which is my joke stablecoin that is backed by Cheesecake Factory gift cards. And there's a wallet address recipient there, right? So if I click execute here, works pretty fast, but then you can see here we have that block explorer, right? That demonstrates like, hey, this transaction took place. Let's go look at that. Still, the transaction is still thinking here. There we go, right? So I transferred that one stable coin to another address, and there that is, right? And of course, when we do this in production sometime, we might do that with USDC or whatever stablecoin seems to be best suited for enterprise overall. So that's B2B stablecoin. Of course, we'll integrate that to provide payments precisely for those kind of like business scenarios I was just talking about earlier, right? Large enterprise maybe wants to do business with a corporation cross-border to do direct trade and settlement there, rather than going through multiple layers of intermediaries and importers, exporters. They could do this, right? This is feasible today with us. So of course, if you own a business or an enterprise or active and have that use case on hand, we'd love to work with you, right? And there's also this aspect of baseline and Axiom that can come in and really complete the whole picture, right? Because let's talk about other things. What other kind of assurances of data do you need around this? Well, what exact invoice am I paying, right? I could have so many different bills from you that I had to pay you $1, right? I buy 1,000 different widgets. I have 1,000 different orders, each for $1, right? How do I attribute that? I could do that with ZK, right? So like a ZK remittance proof would fulfill that exact need, right? So yeah, that's just transfers. Another one I talked about was called ABAP NFT. Well, let's go see if I can find this here. What did I call it again? Something NFT. Yeah, this was an NFT mint example here. So, hey, let's do this on Celo, right? And this kind of speaks to the EVM compatibility of N-chain, right? That it can do all of these different kinds of networks it could communicate with. So if I execute there, and now we have a link on the Celo block explorer. Pretty cool thing about Celo I heard the other day. Layer 1 blockchain transitioning to an Ethereum layer 2, actually. That's like, it's a bit off topic, but I was happy to see that actually, because man, what a cool thing, right? Because they followed the Ethereum roadmap the whole way up to that point, and good demonstration of interoperability there. So yeah, here's the different network, right? It's a layer 1 network. Again, it'll change to layer 2 later on, based on the proposal that's there. But let me close down that. Just my calendar popping up there. So there we go. There's an NFT mint, right? So again, let's think about the use of ZK, right, in tokenization, right? If I wanted to do things like a tokenization of an invoice, right, a ZK proof's really useful, right? Because I can demonstrate to specific counterparties when I have the token that says, hey, this is an invoice that's about to be paid based on these milestones. Can you lend me money? Right. So think about this, emergence of like an enterprise DeFi or corporate DeFi, right? That would be, based on baseline, based on zero knowledge, based on Axiom, right? In the sustainability realm, another thing we think about is give companies setting each other's benchmarks for sustainability and being able to verify that to say, hey, every year that you reduce your emissions by 10%, I will give you a 2% discount on payment terms, right? That's an emerging idea or use case to go for, right? So I demonstrate that in ABAP, but I also said, like as I demonstrated earlier, there's all of these in JavaScript with the Node.js SDK as well. So if I wanted to do this transfer of ERC20s, right, in JavaScript, and again, this is very backend, but you could put a fancy React UI in front of this if you wanted to. So node send ERC20. And there you go. There's another block explorer link right there, and that's the transfer of the Cheesecake USD on Celo in that case, right? Same with minting of the NFT, right? You could, yeah, you get the idea. This one API stack hugely powerful for many different kinds of enterprise use cases, however you want to integrate. And I should stress, right, because I'm an SAP person, I broadcast to SAP people all the time, right? I showed like this native ABAP integration, which is this kind of COBOL-ish language, that Pro UBC is written in. There's also this trend of SAP doing more in the cloud, right? With the business technology platform, with cloud platforms, right? That's why you would also, as like an SAP user, would care about these TypeScript integrations, right? Because that may be more their preference in terms of modernizing their approach to infrastructure, clean core architecture of the underlying S4 system, right? So yeah, any different way that an enterprise want to work with us in terms of integrating BRI-1, all feasible, all possible. Getting back to here, hitting a few highlights of that. That's the wallet as a service, right? You saw that happen in terms of use of the wallet to do different transactions. You could do different accounts by user in those different organizations and work groups. You can get access controls, which is so critical, right? Something like MetaMask, great for a DeFi user, great for a crypto investor, not as great for a company that wants to keep track of how the corporate treasury is going, right? And who's managing accounts payable. Yeah, we featured Polygon and Celo here, but any EVM compatible, even non-EVMs would work here with some work as well. And what are some use cases? I talked about that. Agriculture, oil, gas, manufacturing, freelance workers, you name it. Tons of different ideas there. A couple of different things on the roadmap. One, of course, is ZK EVM, right? To make the transfer more privacy preserving, improve that user experience, the ZK remittance proofs I was talking about. And, making like I know some DeFi folks might like this, like think about usage of things like Uniswap and Chainlink as this way to innovate on the local currency conversion to make those more efficient. So would love to share more about that. There's some open source code examples there. And in the Slack, I'll blow up the Slack with a whole bunch of other resources about this, and I'm free all the time to share with folks if they want to work more hand-on. So I'll stop there. Other questions, observations, thoughts, whatever, based on what was shared today.
Yeah, a lot of questions, probably not enough time.
Yeah.
I always have tons of questions about the
Yep.
under the hood ZK implementation, but I guess we can just go to my like provide payment question of how much can you kind of share with us of what's happening under the hood when I can submit some fiat from my side. Can I do that and then have stablecoin out?
Yeah. So let's look at the transaction. We can look at the transaction like in depth later, but essentially what it is provide payments operates a liquidity pool of stablecoins, right? And when we see certain identities come in that have a valid signature, right, to the wallet address to the transaction. Now, we as provide payments, we KYC these customers, right, to say like, I know this is going to be Acme Corp, and I know that's their wallet. No one else knows that, right? But I'm comfortable giving this corporation $100 to go retire some carbon offsets, because when I invoice them for $100 plus service fee, they'll pay it, right? So so provide payments funds the transaction, but it's still signed and attributed to that user's wallet. Think of it like an account abstraction idea, right? It's not the exact ERC 443, but inherits a lot of the same ideas in terms of the execution.
Okay, and are there any plans to I'm like, is there an existing like provide payments like SDK or is there plans for that?
Yeah, so Eco is actually a really good example of that overall in terms of what that looks like. So there are docs on that, but if we look specifically at if we look at that in particular, and there's actually a whole repo that's dedicated to Eco in particular, right? So if I go to github.com and go under here under Eco API resources. This describes a similar kind of set of resources like we went through today, right? One being Postman, but under this sample apps folder, if I look under Node.js sample script, and I look at this offset carbon by project, right? Now, the initial authentication, very similar as we saw earlier, but here is that api.providepayments.com and the request that goes in there. So yeah, we're definitely, especially on stablecoin transfers, gonna tidy that up a bit more, right? But for right now, Eco is the primary use case driver of provide payments at the moment. So
okay. Yeah, I mean, I have a ton more, but I think we're over time. So I think it's a tradition on the show. The final thing you have to do is show us your Spotify playlist, what you've been listening to, your last 5, and then you can leave.
All right, here we go. Here we go. I got some Roddy Rich on here, man. Like that was or on here today. Yeah, like I want to see more Spotify playlists out of the community here. I do a little bit of everything, right? A few podcasts that are Web3 related, some EDM type of stuff, sometimes some random stuff. I put some early 90s Michael W. Smith stuff. So I have a weird taste in music. Who doesn't, right? But cool, guys. Hey, I love sharing all today. So people can always find me in the Baseline Slack. I left my contact info up there in terms of email and Calendly if people want to follow up with me directly. And of course, you guys can always connect offline with me as well. So we'll break down that BPI interop use case even more in our Friday sessions. So hope to see you there. SAP, if you're watching, I hope to see you there. Like we need to get some money into this BPI Interop Fest and Roadshow this year. So
yeah, call them out.
So Jürgen, I'm putting Jurgen, Alex Schaefer, Mehran. Who else from SAP am I putting on notice here? All those folks. I tagged them on LinkedIn, so they know about it. Right? So hopefully we'll get their support later this year. So hey, thanks guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to share. So
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks for
Ryan. We
joining us.
appreciate you coming on. Yeah,
Yeah,
always a
definitely.
pleasure.
It's a great demo.
cool. Thanks all.
Take it easy. Thank you everybody for watching. We
See ya.
will see you on the next one.